I got home 4 days early, and the porch light was off. That's the first thing I noticed pulling onto Ridgeline Court at 11 at night, after 14 hours on I-80, no porch light. My wife Donna never let that light go dark. Not once in 22 years. Not since the night I told her a dark porch is the first thing a tired driver looks for and doesn't find. So I sat in the cab a minute with the engine ticking down, looking at a house that should have had at least one window glowing, and didn't. Then I saw it. A thin seam of light under the garage door, and somebody moving inside. I'm 62 years old. I've hauled freight from Sacramento to Scranton and back more times than I can count, and 30-some years behind the wheel teaches you one thing above everything else. Pay attention to what doesn't fit. A silent house with a lit garage at 11 at night didn't fit. So I killed the engine, walked around back, and eased the side door open. My grandson Caleb was standing over a folding table with a hot iron in his hand, pressing a stack of dress shirts that weren't his man-sized shirts, a woman's blouses, sheets working through a laundry basket taller than his hip. He was 13. He shouldn't have been able to see over that basket, let alone iron a collar straight. When he heard the door, he spun around so fast the iron nearly went off the edge of the table, and for 1 second, before he caught himself, his face did something I'll never forget. Relief, and then dread, both at once, like he wasn't sure which one of us had just walked in. Grandpa Russ. His voice cracked on my name. You're not supposed to be back till Saturday. Load got rerouted, I said, and I meant to say more, but I was looking at his arms, long sleeves in July, in a hot garage, sweat soaking through at the collar. Why are you doing laundry at 11 o'clock at night, son? I like being useful, he said, too fast, the kind of fast that's rehearsed. He picked the iron back up, like the conversation was over. I didn't touch that iron out of his hand. I didn't raise my voice. I've moved 100,000 pounds of freight in my life, and I know that the fastest way to lose a load is to yank the strap instead of walking it loose. So I just said, "Where's your Aunt Priya? Where's everybody?" "Book club," he said. "In the city. They stay over sometimes." Everybody. My daughter Michelle had died 6 years ago, car accident on the 15th, a Tuesday. I still can't drive past without my hands going cold on the wheel. And Caleb had come to live with me and Donna the year after that, when his father, my son-in-law Dev, remarried a woman named Priya and decided a growing boy needed more structure than 2 grandparents could give him. I'd fought it. Donna had fought it harder. But a father has rights, a grandfather doesn't, and Caleb had gone to live in Dev and Priya's house 18 months ago, 40 minutes away, and I told myself 40 minutes was nothing. I told myself Dev loved that boy. I told myself a lot of things, because the alternative was admitting I'd handed my daughter's only child to people I didn't fully trust, and there wasn't a single thing I could do about it. I looked at that basket of laundry that wasn't his. I looked at his sleeves. "Roll them up," I said. "Grandpa, it's nothing." "Roll them up." His hands were shaking when he did it. The bruises went from his wrist to above his elbow, yellow-green at the edges, meaning old, and a darker ring near the wrist, meaning recent, meaning somebody had grabbed that boy hard enough and often enough to leave a map of it on his skin. I've hauled freight through every kind of weather this country has, and I have never in 62 years felt cold the way I felt cold standing in that garage. But it was what I found in the house 20 minutes later in a drawer in Priya's sewing room, wrapped in a dish towel like it was nothing, that told me this wasn't just cruelty. This was something else. Something with a name attached to it I recognized. If you're watching this tonight, I want to say something to you the way I'd say it to my own kin, sitting across the table. Thank you for being here. Tell me down in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight, because it matters to me to know who's listening when I tell this. This story carries some invented details, folded in to protect the people it's really about. But the heart of it, the truth in it, I lived every hour of it, and I think you need to hear it the way I needed to live it. I'll back up, because to understand what I found in that drawer, you have to understand who I was before any of this, and who my Michelle was, because none of this makes sense without her. My name's Russell Hale. Everybody who's ever ridden with me calls me Russ. I grew up in Modesto, California, in a house my father built himself one room at a time, because that's what you did when you didn't have the money to do it all at once. My daddy drove a grain truck for the co-op, and I rode with him from the time I could sit up straight. and there was never a single day in my life I wanted to do anything else. I got my Class A license at 19, married Donna at 22, and by 25 I had a rig of my own and a baby girl who used to fall asleep in the cab to the sound of the diesel because that engine noise was the only lullaby that ever worked on her. Michelle grew up half in that truck and half at home, and she turned out steadier than any child raised that way had a right to be. She was smart in the specific, stubborn way, the kind of smart that doesn't accept an answer just because an adult gave it. She became a school teacher, 2nd grade, and she used to say she taught 7-year-olds the same way I taught her. To check a load, look at it from every side before you trust it's secure. She married Dev when she was 29. He was an accountant, quiet, careful with money, in a way that seemed like a virtue back then. I walked her down the aisle in a hall that smelled like candle wax and thought, this is the easiest thing I've ever done, giving this girl to a man who's going to take care of her. Caleb came 2 years later. I remember the hospital, the smell of the disinfectant, Donna crying into my shoulder, and Michelle holding that baby up like she was showing him off to the whole world. I remember she looked at me over his head and said, Dad, I want him to grow up exactly the way I did, in the truck, believing in something. I told her I'd teach him to check a load before he could walk if she wanted. She laughed so hard she woke the baby. She had 11 years with him, 11 good years. Then, a Tuesday in March, 6 years ago, a driver ran a light on the 15 doing 55, and my daughter didn't come home from a parent-teacher conference, and I have not been the same man since, and I don't expect I ever will be. Dev grieved. I'll give him that for the first year. He grieved like a man who'd lost the center of his own life. Caleb stayed with us most weekends, and Dev would come get him Sunday nights looking like a man wearing another man's clothes. Then, about a year and a half in, he started seeing Priya. She worked at his firm. She was younger, put together, the kind of woman who complimented Donna's cooking in a voice that never quite reached her eyes. They married 9 months later, fast enough that Donna and I exchanged a look across the reception hall that we never said out loud what it meant. And then, 6 months after the wedding, Dev sat us down at our own kitchen table and told us Caleb was moving in with them full-time. Structure, he said. Stability. A 2-parent household. I remember Donna's hand finding mine under the table and squeezing so hard it left a mark, because we both understood, without saying it, that we were losing the last living piece of our daughter, 40 minutes at a time, 1 weekend visitation schedule at a time. I should have fought harder. That's the thing I carry heaviest out of all of this. I told myself 40 minutes wasn't far. I told myself a father has the right. I told myself Caleb would tell us if something was wrong, because that boy never lied to me in his life until the night I found him ironing another family's laundry at 11 o'clock with bruises up both arms. And I understood that a boy doesn't lie to protect people who are good to him. He lies to protect the ones he's afraid of losing entirely, because he's already lost one parent and can't survive losing the illusion of another. So there I was, back in the present, standing in Priya's sewing room at nearly midnight with a dish towel in my hand and my grandson's bruises still burning behind my eyes, and I unwrapped it, and inside was my daughter's wedding ring, Michelle's wedding ring, the one Dev had buried her in, or told everyone he had a simple gold band with a chip of her grandmother's sapphire, the one I'd watched the funeral home director slide onto her finger myself before they closed the casket. I had stood at that casket. I had watched it happen. And here it was, 6 years later, wrapped in a dish towel in another woman's sewing drawer like a shirt button waiting to be sewn back on. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to find Caleb in the doorway, still in his rolled-up sleeves, looking at the ring in my palm like he already half knew what it was and had been waiting his whole young life for somebody else to find it too. "That's Mom's," he said. "Not a question." "Yeah," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. "I found it in there a few months ago," he said, quiet, careful, like he was confessing to a crime. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for scissors for a school project. I didn't tell Dad because... He stopped. "Because what, son?" "Because Priya told me if I ever went through her things again, she'd tell Dad I stole from her. And Dad believes her over me now." He said it flat, factual, the way you'd report a weather pattern. And that flatness was worse than if he'd cried, because it meant he'd had time to get used to the shape of it. I sat down on the edge of that unfamiliar bed with my daughter's ring in my hand, and I made my grandson sit next to me, and I said, "Tell me everything. Not the version where it's fine, the real one." And he did. He told me about the 4:30 mornings, before school, cleaning bathrooms Priya inspected with a paper towel run along the baseboard, redoing it if the towel came back with a smudge. He told me he ate dinner standing at the counter most nights because the dining table was, in Priya's words, for the family, and somewhere in the last year he'd stopped counting himself as part of that word. He told me about the ironing her two sisters when they visited, sometimes Dev's shirts too now, because Priya said a boy needed chores, and Dev never argued with her about what those chores should be. He told me about his 12th birthday, 4 months ago, which nobody in that house had mentioned. Not a cake, not a card, and how he'd gone up to his room and looked at old pictures on his phone of Michelle blowing out candles with him on her lap and cried into a pillow so nobody would hear him, because crying, in that house, got you called dramatic. "Why didn't you call us?" I asked him, and my voice broke clean in half on the question, because Donna and I had a phone on the nightstand every single night, and it never once rang with his voice on it asking for help. "Priya said if I complained to you guys, Dad would think I was trying to turn you against her," he said. "And I didn't want him to stop loving her, because then he'd be alone again. And I didn't want that to be my fault too." 13 years old, carrying his father's marriage on his back, like a strap he couldn't set down. I pulled that boy into my arms right there on the edge of a stranger's guest bed, and he held onto the back of my shirt with both fists and made a sound I will hear for the rest of my life, low and wrecked and long overdue, like something that had been folded up small inside him for 2 years finally found room to unfold. "I'm sorry," I said into the top of his head, "and I meant it the way you mean the truest thing you've ever said. I'm sorry I let them take you 40 minutes away and told myself that was close enough. I should have seen it sooner. I should have asked harder questions. That's on me, not you. None of this is on you." We stayed like that a long time. When he finally sat back, wiping his face rough with the heel of his hand, his mother's exact gesture, the same one Michelle used after every bad day at school, he looked at the ring still sitting in my palm. "Why does she have it, Grandpa? Mom's in it. How does Priya have Mom's actual ring?" "That," I said, closing my fist around it, "is what I am going to find out tonight, before the sun comes up." I called Donna first. She was at her sister's, not book club, that part at least. Had been a lie Priya told Caleb to keep him from checking, and I told her to get in the car, because I needed a witness, and because some things a man shouldn't face down alone at midnight, even when he's 62 and stubborn about it. Then I sat Caleb down with a glass of milk at that kitchen table, the family table, and told him he was going to eat at it tonight, whether anybody liked it or not, and I made him a sandwich with my own 2 hands in a kitchen that wasn't mine, and I waited. Dev and Priya got home a little after 1 in the morning, laughing about something in the driveway before they saw my truck parked crooked across 2 spaces. I watched the laughter die on both their faces through the window, in real time, like a light switching off. Dev came in first. "Russ, what are you doing here?" "Where's Caleb?" "He's at the table," I said. "Eating dinner. At the family table, since apparently that's a novelty in this house." Dev's face did something complicated, and I'll give the man this much credit for 1 second. I saw real confusion there, real ignorance, and I understood that whatever had been happening to my grandson, his own father hadn't fully seen it either, or hadn't let himself. Grief does that. It hollows a man out and lets other people move into the empty rooms and rearrange the furniture, and he doesn't notice until somebody outside points at what's been done to his own house. But Priya's face did something different. Priya's face went very still and very careful, the face of a woman doing arithmetic. I held up the ring. "Found this in your sewing drawer," I said. "Michelle's wedding ring, the one that was supposed to be buried with her. Somebody want to explain to me how it ended up wrapped in a dish towel in your dresser 6 years later?" Dev's face went white. Actual white, the color draining out of it like I'd pulled a plug. "That's not that ring was buried with her. I watched them." "You watched a funeral director close a casket," I said. "You didn't watch him lock it, Priya. I'm asking you." She held out about 4 seconds before it cracked. "The funeral home called me," she said, quiet, clipped, already defending instead of confessing, before the service. said there was a mix-up. The ring they'd prepped for burial was the wrong one, a replacement. And did the family want the original back, or should they proceed with what they had? Dev was in no state to make that call that week. I made it. I told them to proceed. I kept the real one because it seemed wasteful to bury a sapphire in the ground, and I always meant to give it to Caleb when he was older, when he could appreciate it, instead of some funeral home swap costing this family thousands. You made a unilateral decision, I said, and I could hear my own voice going somewhere flat and cold and very, very steady. The voice I use when a load's shifted on the highway and panic will get somebody killed. To swap out my daughter's ring at her own funeral, tell nobody, and then keep it hidden in a drawer for 6 years while her son slept 40 feet down the hall, not knowing his mother's actual ring existed in the same house. I was going to give it to him eventually. When? Caleb's voice, from the kitchen doorway, cracked but clear. Nobody had heard him get up from the table. You've had it 2 years since I moved in. You watched me every day. You never once. That is not a conversation for you to be part of, Priya snapped, and something in her voice, that instant reflex to control the room even now, even caught, told me everything about the shape of the last 18 months that Caleb's bruises had only sketched the outline of. He's part of every conversation in this house from now on, I said, starting with why he's got bruises on both arms that a 13-year-old doesn't get from ironing shirts. The silence that followed was the kind that tells you everything. Dev looked at his son's arms, really looked, the way I'd looked at him in that garage, and something in him finally broke through whatever fog he'd been living inside since Michelle died. He walked over, rolled the sleeve back himself, and made a sound like the air had gone out of him. Priya, he said, what is this? He's clumsy, she said. He bruises easy. He's always... Show me your hand, Dev said. Quiet. Terrible. She didn't. That told him what he needed. I'm not going to walk you through every hour of what came after, because some of it belongs to a family court and not to a story I'm telling strangers on the internet. Kind as you've been to sit here with me tonight, I'll tell you the parts that matter. Dev filed for divorce inside of a week, and inside of a month, with Donna's and my full support and testimony, custody of Caleb came fully to Dev, with Donna and me named as backup guardians and given standing visitation any day of the week we wanted, which we have used every single week since. The ring is Caleb's now. I had it cleaned and resized to fit a chain, and he wears it under his shirt, close, where nobody can take it from him again. He still cries about his mother sometimes. So do I. We do it together now, most nights, at that kitchen table that used to be Priya's rule, and is now just a table where a boy gets to eat dinner sitting down like a person who belongs somewhere. There's a particular chair at that table used to be his, at our house, since he was small enough to need a booster seat, and some nights I catch myself just looking at it empty during the week, waiting for the weekend, and then Friday comes and he walks in the door and drops his backpack in the hallway the way boys do, and sits down in that chair, and eats like a person who knows the food isn't going anywhere, and neither is he. I think about the 4 seconds I sat in that truck cab looking at a dark porch light before I went to investigate. 30 years of driving taught me to notice what doesn't fit the pattern. It took me 2 more years to apply that same attention to my own grandson's silences on the phone. His careful, "I'm fine, Grandpa." The way he'd change the subject fast whenever I asked about his stepmother. I heard it. I just didn't let myself understand what I was hearing, because understanding it meant admitting I'd handed my daughter's boy into a house I should have looked at harder before I ever let the door close behind him. If there's a lesson in this I'd hand to anyone listening tonight, and I don't say that lightly, because I'm not a man who likes handing out lessons, it's this. When a child tells you they're fine in a voice that's a half step too fast and too high, that's not an answer. That's a door closing. Go find out what's on the other side of it before it's a stranger who has to tell you. Standing in somebody else's garage at midnight, with an iron still warm on the table and bruises that had been there far longer than they should have gone unseen. My daughter taught 7-year-olds to check a thing from every side before they trusted it was secure. I wish to God I'd remembered that lesson sooner, for the one child of hers I had left to protect. He's asleep upstairs right now, in the room that was always his, in the house that was always supposed to be enough for him, and in a little while I'm going to go up and check on him one more time before I turn in myself, the way I have every night since he came home. And then tomorrow, God willing, I'm going to make him scrambled eggs with cheddar the way his mother used to make them. And we're going to sit down at that table together, and nobody in this world is ever going to make that boy eat standing at a counter again.